Good morning and welcome to WNHH-FM's Dateline New Haven. Dateline Hamden today. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. State Representative Michael D'Agostino makes Hamden tick, and he makes the state tick. He's also dipping his toe into the Democratic presidential primary campaign. Last of all, he is one of my favorite people to have on the air, so that's why I'm always psyched every time he comes in. Mike is here in the WNHA studio. Tell us all about that. Thanks for coming back in.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to New Haven Hospital for providing support for today's program. Mike, we're going to talk about Hamden. We're going to talk about the legislature. But first, let's talk about what's the big news that people follow, the political soap opera. My wife and I were saying this, like other people watch the AFC championships and like who's mad and who's getting fired, every little play. That's how we follow these Democratic presidential primaries and the debates. And this week, you're supporting Bernie Sanders for the Democratic presidential nomination. When did you announced that this week, right?
I announced that this week. That's right. Yeah.
And the soap opera of the week, which I'm convinced is being fueled by Russian bots, I really do.
And
believe
CNN.
That, yeah, is whether this fight between Sanders supporters and Elizabeth Warren supporters over a conversation they had months ago about whether a woman could become president. There's a lot of chatter about it online, and some people saying it's showing. Who do you believe what was said at the meeting? Does it show that Bernie's a sexist doing what Elizabeth Warren said he did to Hillary Clinton in 2016? Or whether Elizabeth Warren's desperate because progressives are choosing between Warren and Sanders, and after a period at which Warren was hot, there's a stampede toward Sanders. I mean, Mike, that's you a part of a stampede right now among, seriously, local officials, but mostly activist groups, unions and environmentalists, going towards Sanders in the last few weeks, and that Warren, some people say, brought this up to try to stem that. What's your take on that? I'll give you mine after yours.
Yeah. First of all, I think it was a conversation last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
This is going to sound like a politician's answer, but I believe them both.
I totally believe them both. 100%
right?
believe them
I mean,
both.
that a man and woman can have a conversation and come away with two completely different perceptions of it is.
And also, when you hear their description of the conversation,
yeah,
it's completely understandable that they would remember it different ways. Sanders said, we're talking about the election, and I'm saying Donald Trump's going to throw everything at you and all that anti-woman stuff, and that's going to really be a challenge dealing with that. And she's hearing, realistically, that he's saying a woman can't become president, I'm more likely. And that's fine. That's interesting. We talk about that stuff, but...
Look, if I think even Warren supporters would acknowledge that down to his marrow, Bernie Sanders is not sexist and truly believes that a woman can become president. That said, wouldn't surprise me at all if he said something in that conversation that he didn't perceive as sexist at all. That was or that she perceived as sexist. That happens. I've done that. You've done that.
Why are we talking about?
Well,
this?
that's the big thing, and that's really what's
so. There
unfortunate.
was the whole Bernie Bros thing that Hillary people were upset about in 2016, where they were mansplaining, and it was obnoxious.
And that reared its head also when WFP endorsed Warren
Working
again.
Families Party.
That is unacceptable. Bernie's condemned that.
I know one person who was online I thought was pretty obnoxious. Elizabeth Warren's a liar. But I really believe that what we learned from 2016 is you don't have to be a conspiracy theory like I'm being now, but that there are a lot of people who want the other party to talk about BS rather than real issues. Yeah. So the real challenge for progressives is they're saying, do we want Warren or Sanders? Who's more right on health care? They're both in the same place, but there are differences. Is it important to have sort of like the woman who had the most important reform of the last decade, Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, who's really sharp on issues? Or is it important the guy who's inspiring this sort of mass outpouring of donations and does have support among some Trump voters? Those are all good issues. Yeah. What they said in that conversation is a way to turn to reality. So CNN likes it because it's headlines.
And who benefits? Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I mean, it's amazing to me we're having a conversation about sexism in the Democratic Party, and we're not talking about Joe Biden, right?
Or we're not talking about or Donald Trump, groping women and bragging
but
about
in the Democratic Party,
how
Biden gets a pass here. I mean, with his support of the Hyde Amendment and a guy who still calls women honey and dear.
So the conspiracy part, and I usually don't believe conspiracy theories. I love them because they're fun, but usually it's just someone screwed up and it's a conspiracy. But we know that the Russians, among others, are sophisticated, as well as, let's say, the Republican Party people who do the web. When you see something that's going to divide people at the trenches, you then use bots to amplify it through fake identities on Facebook and other social media platforms.
And you amplify the communications.
And I do believe that's happening here. But
look, it's clearly happening. It's going to happen not on this issue, but other issues. And let's be honest. And I don't want to be it's the media guy, but that was some of that was ridiculous at that debate. The questions,
It was.
I mean, they might have just, when did you stop beating your wife, Senator Sanders? I mean, those kind of questions, and it just was. It's the same kind of thing, right? I mean, the amplification helps divide.
But you deal with it as now away from conspiracy theories. You deal with this as an elected official. That the tendency in media and public discussion, by the way, because that reflects public discussion, is to do reality TV. Personalities, invented spats, rather than the minutia of, do we get rid of the individual mandate? Will tens of millions of people not have health care? What's happening with Medicaid? Right. And so you do have to, whether or not it's conspiracy or just the conspiracy of reality, how life works, how do you as an elected official try to get people to focus on substance when you're running for office or you're supporting a candidate for president?
Well, look, I think we're pretty lucky here, at least certainly locally, that most of my constituents really do want to do a deep dive into these issues. I've gone to several community meetings over the past couple of weeks, and people have very in-depth questions, whether it's local issues, state issues, national issues. So I feel I'm a little insulated in that regard. But
you're in our bubble here.
Yeah, right. You're right. This is a very educated electorate, obviously, in this area, and in the state of Connecticut generally. But I think you just have to keep hammering the message and keep hammering the issues and talking about
which actually Sanders is good,
and that's really
and
why
Warren had her moment. Sanders has completely done an end round against the media. She's raised more money from individuals, I believe, than anyone in the history of American politics.
And that's really one of the reasons why I went to him. To me, there's a difference between being a candidate and a catalyst. This guy's a catalyst. Just step back a minute. And how do we explain Sanders, right? This guy, Democratic Socialist senator from Vermont, comes out of nowhere in 2016, comes within a hair's breadth of the nomination, is inspiring people across the country, young, middle-aged, old, across the economic spectrum. How do you explain that? It's not just policy. It's a matter of being consistent, someone who's actually worked for structural change for his entire life. That's different than being a politician. That's different than being a candidate. This guy's a catalyst for change. I think that's really part of his core. And there's other policy differences between him and Sanders, him and Warren and others that obviously tipped it in Sanders' favor for me. But it was that piece in particular that I think really speaks volumes, and you just touched on it.
Yeah, and it is interesting. I've always tried to figure it out. I had the pleasure of meeting Bernie Sanders once in 1981 when he became the first socialist mayor.
Where was that?
In Vermont. He got elected in 1981, and I was working for the New Haven Advocate, which was an old alt weekly.
Sure, I remember the Advocate.
So he let me spend a day with him.
What?
When he had no secretary, and they were trying to run him out because he won by 10 votes.
Is there accident. Did you write something up? Is there?
I did a cover story.
Well, you gotta find that and
it's so much
publish
fun.
it online.
So the whole time I've dug the guy, and I thought it was hilarious that this because I come from New York Jewish guy who still sounds like it. He's from Brooklyn.
Right.
I mean, socialist. I'm a socialist thinking he can get elected.
Yeah.
And he had all these pro-gun people electing him in rural Vermont. And now that he's inspired those people is when he's an old man kind of just railing.
You got to dig that up and put that online. Hilarious. You got to dig up that article.
But I think you're right. I think the thing that has always, he says the same things he did when I was with him that day.
That's the difference, right? That's the difference. Just pick an issue like the Defense Authorization Act. Warren voted for it in 2018, now voted against it when she's running for president. She actually voted to give Donald Trump more money than he requested in 2018. Bernie, very consistent, always opposing that. So that's the kind of thing where you talk about consistency. And of course, the big issue for me has been his consistent support of organized labor. I mean, that's really, and
she's for that too.
Look, she is. I'm not going to say she's not. But when I was researching the candidates and doing my deep dive, I looked at her page and her policy position on workers' rights and improving the lives of workers. And this was a couple of months ago. And it was literally 2 or 3 pages deep before I saw a mention of organized labor. That's changed now. But Bernie, right up front, increase union membership, combat the corporate attack on organized labor. And that's not just a policy position for him in this election. He's taken that position for decades. Labor needs friends who have been there since the beginning and aren't just, it's not a matter of convenience. And that happens too often in elections. People play lip service to organized labor, and then sort of it goes by the wayside. He's someone, out of the entire candidate slate, has been there, is going to be there. Because you can't, and this is the other big difference with Warren, right? You can't just rely on government to take on these entrenched interests. You need some sort of institution outside of government, because government, of course, can fail and be taken over by those interests. We've seen that. The only institution left that combats corporate interests, corporate attacks on workers, is organized labor. That's it.
It's always historically been the number one countercheck to capital.
Absolutely.
So even George Shultz, who was the economic and I think also defense secretary for Ronald Reagan, he said, we got everything we wanted after the air traffic controller strike, where we've rolled back union rights.
Yeah.
And even though we won, I think it's bad for the country how much we won, because you have to have checks on power. So even if you don't agree with everything a union does, you don't agree with everything the corporations do.
On that power.
And that's why in New Haven, a lot of people, including myself, sometimes have been critical of the Unite Here union that has taken the Yale union, so control of
the
city
Board
government.
Of Alders,
But I think it's incredibly important that they've done that, because you don't also agree with everything Yale does as the dominant power in town, and you need to have groups who represent other
the
groups.
The attack on workers and organized labor in the past 20 years has been multifaceted. It's been legislative,
1980,
Congress,
years.
State houses, judicial, coordinated judicial attacks, policy think tanks. I mean, again, organized labor is the only institution left to combat that, and Bernie Sanders has been there. That to me really was the tip. I didn't feel like it was lip service for him. It's been consistent, and I'm hoping that the Connecticut labor organizations will see that and come along eventually. I know SEIU in New Hampshire already endorsed him.
He's got Nevada, got a big one, Clark County.
Yeah, and teachers, I think, are very supportive. Again, guys been talking for years about raising teacher pay.
I'm worried about Bernie Sanders' age. I'm just going to say it.
No, really?
First term, you can be in your 80s. It's hard to win the White House. You got to be able to go in for 2 years, because otherwise you're risking losing power and all that appointing power and putting through policies.
Yeah.
And I think even on the stage the other night, he was out of it about who's been elected in the last 30 years. He didn't get what Elizabeth Warren was saying about the math.
Yeah, I just look at the vitality of the positions, the strength of sort of the power of.
Like, remember they didn't wake up Reagan? What was it when they attacked the ship in Lebanon? American soldiers, was that it? And that because he was starting to have Alzheimer's.
Yeah, well, that was also an onset of the assassination attempt, right? He really went downhill after that. Under that, the age issue has not factored into my reasoning at all, to be perfectly honest with you. Just they all seem, capable in that regard. At least the older candidates. Well, I don't think he'll hit his 80s in a first term, right?
What is he now? 78?
I thought he was like 76, 77.
Okay, so he'll be in the 80s in the first term.
At the end of the first term, I believe.
Yeah. Oldest president ever sworn.
Yeah. Well, I think if Trump wins again, right? Trump's in his 70s as well.
Yeah.
So and Biden, God forbid, as well. I can't. I understand the appeal of Joe Biden to a lot of people, because he's this, he's the only one who can win. I fell into that trap in 2016.
Oh yeah?
I did. Yeah, I was like, okay, well, I got to support Hillary because she's the only one who can win. A Democratic Socialist can never win the national election. And it was a mistake, and I'm not going to make that mistake again. You got to go with policy and passion over that kind of quote unquote practicality. And I don't buy that argument. And then I look at the Hyde Amendment thing. It flabbergasts me, that that you only flip now on the Hyde Amendment. He doesn't believe that. This guy wants to bar federal funding for abortion clinics. It's amazing.
And Mike D'Agostino, state rep and one of the latest people to endorse Bernie Sanders for president here on WNHH-FM 103.5 live, SteveNewhaven.org. Bruce Crowder, Jennifer Pope checked in here on Facebook. Thanks for listening, folks. So, you brought up something about Sanders, about government can't change it. You got to go outside. So he said recently in the New York Times editorial interview, which was also a very funny interview, but in any case, he said that when he wants to fight for Medicaid expansion, let's say, he's going to fly to Kentucky, the home base of Senate Leader Mitch McConnell, and make the case on his home turf to everyday people that what the other side's fighting for is so that you don't get Medicaid. So that obviously was an important statement about going outside government, which is what Obama, in retrospect, should have done, although it's not his nature, even though he was a community organizer, to do that. So that's the plus for Bernie. And then the other side, the Warren people come up with is, well, when she did the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, which I would argue was the single most important legislative achievement, even more than Obamacare, for our adult lifetime, in terms of the billions of dollars just from low-hanging fruit they immediately got from companies that are predatory financing on your loans or other kinds of financial instruments where they just rip off people, payday check, cashing, mostly people, not mostly, just mostly people of color and poor. And that was hard to do. And that was done through the inside. So basically, partly what's being argued is the person who understands policy the best and how to transform that to action on the inside versus someone who's very consistent about broad goals and then inspires people on the outside to change government.
Well,
Is that a fair way?
No, I think he does both, though, right?
On veterans issues, he worked with Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who's been a senator for decades, so he does understand how the system works. But, I mean, to think about the sea change in the conversation we're having from Obamacare to Medicare for all, that's due to Bernie Sanders. Right? And so you start with those broad ideas, that catalyst for change, and then you work it to make it happen. The reason he's talking about going to Mitch McConnell's district isn't just broad catalyst change, right? It's to make sure that voters in that district pressure their senators to vote for something like that.
That's what you were talking about.
So that's understanding politics, right? I mean, that's. So it really is both.
All right. So what are you going to do for Bernie Sanders?
Well, it's funny. I didn't realize that I was the first among my colleagues to endorse him.
First state legislator?
Yeah, I didn't know that. So I'm planning on reaching out to my fellow legislators to make the case. Obviously, doing media like this to make the case for him as well. I'll try to be as best a surrogate that I certainly can be across the state. The campaign. I hadn't reached out to the campaign before I did it. I just did it. And they reached out to me, so I'll coordinate with them with those sorts of events.
And what about you going to go up to New Hampshire?
Sure, yeah. But I'd like to obviously make sure we've got a good ground game here in Connecticut.
That's right.
Right.
He had a terrible ground game in 2016. So in 2016, the Sanders campaign had the biggest political rally on the New Haven Green,
and he lost
since 1970.
Right.
So that was almost 50 years, 46 years, biggest crowd. He was so clueless on the ground in New Haven that he got clobbered in the city itself.
Tells you need to have a ground game. So I don't want to ignore Connecticut here. I really do want to win the state.
And so Biden's leading in the state, but we have a history of going both ways in terms of the progressive and the kind of insider in Connecticut.
Yeah.
Because Jerry Brown won the
I remember that.
Was that 90? Was that 92 or 80?
I think it was later than that. Wasn't
it? And then he ran a couple times.
Yeah.
But also and in New Haven, Jesse Jackson won.
Yeah.
So you can win New Haven.
I think the more people see and hear Joe Biden, that's going to start waning. I really do.
What about Buttigieg? He's a young guy. You're a young guy.
I can't vote for somebody whose only experience is governing a city smaller than New Haven for 4 years. I can't.
Justin Elko got more votes than Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah, I can't do it. I mean, it seems like he's also, I think, a bit of a conservative in sheep's clothing, but that's beside the point. I can't.
How do you make sense of this phenomenon where millennials and younger voters in general on the Democratic side are going for the septuagenarian Bernie Sanders?
And it's the catalyst.
Wait a second. Then older voters, not the younger voters, are going for the 37-year-old Pete Buttigieg with their idea of what a young person is like. Why is that happening?
I view some of the Buttigieg support as people who support Joe Biden's positions but can't support Joe Biden. Just too old, too establishment, too out of it. Okay, Buttigieg is my vehicle for that instead. Now I don't want to, typecast. I mean, I'm sure there's other reasons to support him people have to support him as well. But again, I think you're touching on sort of the broad appeal of somebody like Bernie. He has appeal to older voters as well. I mean, it's a broad swath of people, and that really is, I think, both the consistency of his policy positions and the catalyst for change.
And Mike Dexter, you're also an attorney.
Yep.
And what are you thinking about the impeachment process starting in Washington today as a lawyer as well as a politician?
First of all, on impeachment, I like Sanders, I was not there until the Ukraine thing. I thought, all this stuff that we're talking about is just political.
Impeachment is political.
It's entirely a political process, but
he needs to have a legal basis.
Yeah, and this, and you just saw the I think it was the GAO report, or Office of General Report, about how he did violate the law by holding up the aid. I almost wish it was a bit more like the Clinton proceedings in the Senate, where it was closed door, and I realize there's a good government issue with that, but I think it's so politicized now that this is obviously just a kind of a foregone conclusion. But I do believe, and the reason I support it is, you just have to have something on the record so that 100 years from now, when people look back on this presidency, there's a stamp there that said, this guy was impeached for what he did. This was wrong. That was the right thing to do for historical purposes.
The Democrats made a tactical decision, which I understand, which I think weakened their case in terms of winning the public ballot, which is that. So I think the dramatic arc of this case is, day one, we knew he did a whole bunch of stuff that you can impeach him for.
Yeah.
So there were no revelations after that were really pretty important, because you knew it. There was no drip like Watergate, oh, this is getting bigger. Oh,
Yeah.
John Dean said this. It turns out they were like paying hush money and they were trying to shut up witnesses and they were, telling the attorney general to break the law. Here, the worst stuff was out at the beginning, so then the spin can start. And the Democrats had to make a decision, which was, do we want this to drag on because it doesn't benefit us? But one of the worst things that came out after they brought the articles of impeachment were people like Giuliani and top Trump administration officials defying subpoenas. So Harold Koh, the former Clinton advisor and State Department advisor at Yale Law School dean, he was in the Times the other day saying we should enforce those subpoenas. He used to send the Capitol Police, whoever serves, the marshals, arrest the administrative officials for violating
Well, then that'll
subpoenas.
go up on appeal. Though.
Yeah, so then they have to press the issue in court about whether they have to file these subpoenas. But it would strengthen their case for impeachment and get more facts out if they waited 5 months to have
or
that
you'd
issued
at least
in
have
court.
more obstruction that you could.
But Palouse and the others, I think correctly, weighed that the longer it drags out, the worse it is for the Democrats. But then it makes their case.
I think they did the right thing, though. And again, this is more for historical purposes than current political purposes, which I respect, is if you compare those articles of impeachment to the Nixon articles of impeachment, the second part of Nixon's articles of impeachment were not about the break-in and the cover-up. It was about using the levers of power, the institutions of government, the CIA, the FBI, to spy on your opponents. That's the second piece of the articles of impeachment against Nixon.
Did he use the IRS, or was that not
exactly? Yeah. So that is really the congruency between this and what Trump did, is using the levers of power for political purposes. That you cannot do.
So you're saying keep it simple. That's the point.
That's the point. Yeah, that's the argument I would make. Is you don't want anybody doing that, Republican or Democrat.
Mac D'Agostino, State Representative Hamden, here on Dateline WNHH 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhaven.org. So, Mike, one of the issues you've been at the forefront in the state has been education funding. You were on the Board of Ed in Hamden before you were state legislature. I believe you're on the Education Committee?
I was. No, not anymore.
So there was just a major settlement announced in the Sheff versus O'Neill school desegregation lawsuit. Specifically, that was about Hartford schools, but it led to your colleagues spending a lot of money statewide to build new magnet schools for regional education where kids from suburbs come in. And now what we're hearing from Ned Lamont, the governor, is, hey, we'll continue to solve this by giving people lots of money for magnet schools. In New Haven, there's a long discussion. We don't believe that's the solution, although magnet schools are fine. How do you feel about this subject?
So, and Sheff is Hartford Limited. You and I had this conversation 3 years ago. And I think when I was here last, I said to you that magnet schools are on the way out, that they're just going to be a death knell for magnet schools. It was not the solution people thought it was going to be. I still believe that. I mean, since we last spoke, the state has taken away funding for transportation for magnet schools. So that's left to the districts. And you have this interesting warfare between districts now on funding. Who's going to pay tuition? Who's going to pay transportation costs? Because the state outside of Hartford, and they're compelled to because of Sheff, outside of Hartford really has the per pupil tuition reimbursements have gone down. Magnet schools, I think, are a failed experiment with respect to desegregation and solving the problems. And people I know love their schools, and it's hard to hear. But I was preaching even when I was on the Board of Ed from Hamden that we should take back Wintergreen School when the time came. And
so
the
what's
town
the
did
alternative?
that.
Was the argument? I kind of make an argument similar to yours, to be honest. And I get pushback from smart people who are smarter than I am, as are you. So you hear from both sides, and they say to me, it's so important to have white kids next to black kids in school, because I'm very sympathetic to black people who say, I don't need a white kid next to me. I need you to stop ripping me off.
Yeah, it's not. This is not white or black.
They're saying that because otherwise, not only does it teach people how to work across boundaries in society, it gets you more money.
Yeah,
this advocate of color says to me, we're going to get more for our schools if it's everybody's
This is an
schools.
economic issue, not a race issue. White kids aren't smarter than black kids, and simply having white kids near black kids by osmosis,
the money follows the white kids because white people dominate your legislature.
This is about reversing decades of discrimination and economic decimation in black and brown communities. That's what this is about. It's about resources. It shouldn't matter whether a class is 100% white or 100% black. They should be getting the same resources, and that's how you equalize. That's why there's an achievement gap in this state. It's about just.
So, as you say, fund urban schools more.
Absolutely, fund urban schools more.
How?
You have to fund ECS. I mean, if you go by the formula that takes into account poverty, which is the number one indicator of child achievement, right? Not race, poverty, right? If you fund ECS properly under the formula, more money will go to those areas. So you can pay teachers more, attract more teachers, put in more resources, repair the buildings, for God's sakes, reduce the headcount in classrooms. That's the advantages that Greenwich has over New Haven, not whether the kids are white or brown or black. I mean, again, poverty. That is the number one indicator of child achievement. And that's why we have an achievement gap in this state, a chasm, because we have such a chasm between wealthy communities and poor communities in this state. Bridgeport compared to Greenwich. That's really the issue.
The part that gets me is that sometimes you try to fix a problem, you come up with complicated solutions that can make it worse. I'm thinking about students of color who move to places like Hamden or West Haven and want to get into these magnet schools in the city, and they have less of a chance because they're black or brown because the formula says you need white kids from the suburbs.
It's nuts.
And there was a school,
really
I think the most integrated school in Connecticut was in Hamden, and then the state, it got shut down partly because the state said it didn't fit their formula of integration because they call it white and non-white.
The racial balance formula is also out of whack. What you should be doing, and what Hamden is I think leading on, and really started investing in this, is doing what's called intra-district magnet schools more. So you try to start breaking down some of the inter-town barriers, right? And there's
how do you do that?
Well, you put resources into schools and you make them attractive internally, right? And then you
have choice. If you live in Westwood, you can go. You'll want to go to
provided the transportation works out. I've never believed it makes sense to have a kid on a bus for 40 minutes. That's insane.
So why isn't Intermagnet, just to be devil's advocate here, a way of localizing the same problem, that rather than just giving everybody enough resources so that your neighborhood school works best, you don't have this complicated transportation within the system, you're going to set up a competition where some get more and you're not fixing
Well, but that's the idea, is you're reversing that. You don't want one school getting more than the other. You want different opportunities at different schools. Let people pick again.
So is that part of the magnet appeal that, and like 20 years ago in New Haven, this issue was cited in favor of what you're talking about, because they say parents want to have the choice of, my kid's more into arts.
They went way too far, I thought, in New Haven, and just sort of, that they sort of went all in. You have to do this gradually because you have to recognize the power of a local school and neighborhoods. That's an important part of
So what do you want to do with Intermagnet? How do you want, what is your
So you do a balance of them. The town of Hamden is looking at maybe 2 or 3 in different locations, balanced out by the local neighborhood schools, and again, part of that also has to do with transportation. You can't put one school in Northern Hamden and put kids from Southern Hamden on a bus for 45 minutes. So you have to do this locally, and then you have to still put resources into the local schools as well. And again, you have choice, but you do it sort of across the board. You do not just simply say, this is it, we're getting rid of all your local schools and we're just doing intra-district.
Have you followed the writing? Nicole Hannah-Jones, others in the Times, they've been following about the history of this 45 minutes on a bus. I happen to agree with it. I think it's crazy in New Haven. People spend an hour on a bus going across town.
Nuts. Yeah.
But she says that no one brought up that issue until Brown versus Board Education started desegregating schools, that people were fine riding a bus for an hour to school they wanted, and that segregationists realize that they won't be called racist if they talk about time on a bus rather than, I don't want my white kid going to school.
I mean, maybe that started the conversation, but I think there's been plenty of actual studies about it now that just whether, again, this is not a race issue. It's just the impact on the student. I don't think people actually just thought about those kinds of transportation issues before Brown v. Board of Ed.
Mike, so what are you going to be doing on this session starting now, short session with education this session? What's in your radar?
Well, so with education, we've already passed the biennial budget, and we've started to make these gradual changes with ECS where we're starting to follow the formula. So there really won't be much of an opportunity this session to impact that. It will be the next budget cycle that I'd like to see at least some more incremental change to following the actual formula, maybe 10% more, 20% more. What honestly I'd like to see, and again, to me, you can't divorce education issues from economic issues. So let's say if we legalize cannabis this session, I don't know if we will or not, but it's on the agenda. One of the things we're talking about doing is making sure that money gets put back into local communities. Now, again, we're talking about using census tract data to dedicate the money to areas in need that have been underserved. That's not a city versus suburb issue.
Like, how do you
use literally street by street, census tract data to look at poverty levels and incarceration levels.
Mm-hmm. And what would you do with the cannabis money then?
Pardon?
How much money would we get from legalized cannabis?
Well, there's been different estimates. I think, within the first year, you could do anywhere from $60 to $100 million. And then hopefully you have basically an annuity over time of anywhere from, $150 to $250 million.
And as you know, that in other states that have legalized and in Canada, it's producing a lot less money than people thought.
It's,
for whatever reason, the black market
Colorado's
still operates.
Done very well.
Yeah, but then
it does still operate, and we're actually getting good data out of Colorado and Massachusetts on how to combat that in terms of having sort of a flexible
and the black
tax
market
structure.
Still operates. Yeah,
but again, it still operates. But we're also now losing dollars to Massachusetts on the legal market.
Hampton,
so
yeah. So you are for legalization?
Yeah. My committee will actually handle the regulatory.
What's
piece
your
of that,
committee?
The General Law Committee.
And you chair that?
I do. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and we will deal with the regulatory structure. We oversee the medical program, so we're trying to use some of the best practices there.
So you're going to be hoping to shepherd that through this term?
I'd like to, with my colleagues on the Judiciary Committee, Steve Stastrom, and the Finance Committee, Jason Rojas, as well. There's a judicial piece, a regulatory piece, and a finance piece.
What do you want to do with the regulatory piece?
You in order to get the votes, you do need a robust structure. You can't have a free for all like you have in Canada, right? So you've got to have a structure that follows the medical piece where you can track everything from seed to sale, making sure, and that's part of the appeal of a legal system, right? Is that you know the product that you're getting. So you regulate the growers, you regulate the retailers. You have restrictions on who you can sell to, how you can sell, that sort of thing. You create an equity commission that actually gives an advantage to people who have been penalized and
so this was the issue in New Jersey. So is that the issue that help people who used to be in the drug trade and African American disproportionately locked up to have as much of a chance to sell? How would you do that?
So again, we would start with an equity commission that takes in applications from, and you again would look at, based on census tract data, are you from an area that was disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs? Are you from an area that has I can't remember the percentage above the poverty rate that we were picking, and that's your starting point. Then you look at the applicant. Did you have an incarceration in your background or in your family? Try to give sort of.
So you actually get more of an advantage?
You would get a head start, actually. And have sort of a micro loan program, because you can't, this is starting a business. And to their credit, the industry, and look, they're doing this because they have a financial interest, but they have come to us and stepped up and say, we will help support these folks. They can still have the majority control of the business, but we will help fund them.
Is it fair to me assume that might be one of the safest microloans government could ever give out in terms of getting paid back? People are going to buy pot.
Yeah, people are going to buy pot. But we're talking about an equity piece on both the front end and the back end, giving people an advantage on the application process, and then taking some of that money, if not the bulk of it. Gary Holder Winfield's been a big supporter of this, taking that money, and John Fonfara at Hartford, Senator Fonfara, taking the bulk of that money and pumping it back into the community.
Now, how do you do that? Whenever we earmark money, that sometimes gives the government a chance to say, we're giving this money to education, et cetera, but then take other dollars that would have gone to education and put somewhere else.
So this is extra money, but the way you do this is not giving a blank check to the city of New Haven. We're actually talking about funding community groups, direct money to people who already have boots on the ground in the community, not just giving it to Hamden, New Haven, and the mayor's office and saying, go ahead and spend it as you choose.
And not have a count. We say, hey, New Haven, we gave you a $10 million increase because we did this. So you don't
have
to
and you don't penalize for that.
Money.
Absolutely. No, you cannot do that. Absolutely.
Very you're going to have an interesting session on this, Mike.
We'll see. You just have to keep sort of plugging away with the conversation. As my colleague Josh Elliott says, it's just a matter of incremental change over time.
The needle.
Yeah.
And we're moving the needle and having that conversation on Dateline, Hamden, on WNHH FM 103.5 here with State Representative Mike D'Agostino. Another big issue this short session is going to be transit and tolls.
Yeah.
Where do you stand on the different toll
proposals? I am for tolls. I wish it wasn't just trucks only. And my very simple pitch to people is this: is you have to pay for transportation. You're going to be paying for it, whether that's in increased taxes or reduced aid to your towns. You're paying for it. So do you want to pay 100% of every dollar spent on transportation, or 40%?
So here's the conversation back to Bernie Sanders. So Ned Lamont ran wanting to get the votes in the middle. Understandably, they poll an issue. So even though Ned Lamont obviously thought that we should toll everybody and get that money, he thought he couldn't get elected that way. So he said, I'm going to do tolls, but only for trucks. So anyone hearing that immediately says he's not really saying everything he's for. He's not taking a strong position. His opponent says, listen to him now. What he's really going to do is have tolls for everybody. He gets in. He said, well, Lowell Weicker, the old governor, was my model, and he ran saying he wasn't for an income tax, and he passed it, though he didn't lie the way Ned did, because he left the room open that those of us who were for an income tax knew what he was doing. But in any case, Lamont gets in and goes, oh, I just discovered now that I'm elected, I want tolls on everybody. So that has a whole storm. He loses a whole year when he has the most political capital to pass tolls, and it dies. So then he comes back a year later. Let's just go halfway with trucks again. Could one argue the only way for you, because now he's going to lose this too. I'll tell you right now, I think you guys are going to lose on this because of the politics, even though the average person, if you sat and talked to them, would end up on your position in my view.
Yeah.
Is it because too many of the politicians don't come out forcefully for what they believe and try to convince people, but rather are very skanky about it? They're a little shady about what they really believe.
Well,
and the average person knows it. You know that when Democrats are saying, I want to go halfway in healthcare, they really don't, and that's okay. Mm. But then you let the other side win by defining the issue.
Well, first of all, I don't agree that Ned Lamont lied, and I wouldn't call him a
Wait. He said I would only do it on trucks, and he had every intention of doing something different, which he admitted the second he got elected.
Ned's a pretty genuine guy. I don't believe
in 2 minutes changed his mind from something he'd been studying for years.
Well, I don't think it was 2 minutes. I think he got in the governor's office and got hit with the scope of the problem, which is billions of dollars needed for transportation. For 10 years, he
even had a think tank studying the scope of the problem. How can you say he didn't know it and only knew it
when
he
got
in?
I mean, he wasn't part of that think tank going in. I don't know about that.
He had his own think tank. He was studying how do we solve the fiscal and
we in the legislature
problems.
Have really only recently been hit with this data from DOT, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't think legislators appreciated the scope of the problem until the last few months.
Well, I was talking about it for years, how much it was going to cost. No one, honestly, who believes on this issue where you stand, didn't think we needed to toll everybody.
Well, I certainly I didn't. I mean, I was out there campaigning on tolls, and I still believe we need it. And
so basically, Lamont's an idiot then. He spent 10 years studying an issue and couldn't tell that he spent 10 years studying an issue, deciding, but didn't realize until a month later that he was totally wrong and has to go back to a different position.
I first of all, I don't know where you're getting that he studied an issue for 10 years. But when I
interviewed him. He said, I've been out of office studying how we spend state money because I want to run for office.
But when you get into the office, you are hit with, and when I got into the session, I got hit with all this information from DOT that they were presenting to us about and Roland, I think you just had on, Roland Lamar, who chairs the Transportation Committee, will tell you that when he got on chair, I think he got steeped in this issue, and the scope of the problem, I think, escaped all of us.
But he never wavered on the idea that you have to toll everybody.
The problem here isn't the governor's office. The issue, the reason we're not passing tolls is a microcosm of the issue in Connecticut, why we can't get a lot of things done, is that there's too many of us. There's too many damn legislators with their parochial interests who are able to block legislation, just a handful of them in the House or even one or two in the Senate. For a state our size, we've got too many damn legislators.
What about one house, like
unicameral? It's Nebraska, I think, does unicameral.
Pay guys more so you don't have to have another job.
That as well. I mean, I think there is something to public service, but I'd like to see us expand and have a sort of a broader swath of representation in the legislature. Although that has changed in the 8 years that I've been there, 7 years that I've been there. Both of those things are they'll never happen just because the land of steady habits, these things will never change. But tolls are a perfect example of how certain legislators in certain border areas are doing what's right for them politically and what their constituents want, but isn't, in my opinion, what's right for the state. And that's just that's why we can't get a lot of things done in this
Sam
state.
Julier, I apologize if I said your name wrong, Julier.
Sam's a good Hamden guy.
What does Mike say to a lockbox on tolls and past rated transportation funds for other purposes?
So we just passed the constitutional amendment that will allow us to put money that we get from tolls absolutely segregated from the budget so that legislators can't get their greedy little hands on it and use it for other purposes, because that's what happened with the lottery money. That's what Sam's saying. I get that, and I get why people don't trust us on that, because we can't help ourselves, right? We would spend it on something else. But thankfully, the people of Connecticut just passed a constitutional amendment that enables us, let me be absolutely clear, to do tolls, whether it's trucks or something else, you absolutely have to segregate that money for that purpose, period, no question.
All right. And your state representative from Hamden, you've been involved in Hamden your whole life. Right now in Hamden, there's a lot of talk about pensions. You have the highest pension burden, I believe, in the state, from lowest in terms of
I don't know if it's the highest, but it's up there. It's definitely up there.
And then, and that even when you've made changes to put money in the system, you still have a high, lost, how much you're going to have to pay in the years ahead. It's going to be painful. Any ideas about what the pension fix should be for him?
Well, I don't know if there is effects except for what the town has been trying to do for the last few years, which is to put more money into it and recognizing the problem. I mean, and again, in some ways, it's
Can I do that without going to 50 mils on taxes? And is that a magic number?
I think it is.
Everybody?
I think I'd like to see it come down. Quite frankly, you can't go above a certain amount without getting into just a falling off a cliff because too many people will leave and not enough businesses will come. It's a microcosm of the state. It's the same issue on the state level.
How do you
right?
solve it when you got to pay for stuff?
The same way the state has. You sit down with everybody, you negotiate changes to plans, what the town has done, you move everybody into Seamers, which the town has done, and you pay the bill, regularly, which they need to start doing more. And that means some tough choices locally, either an increase in the mill rate or some decreased services, but you get over this hump, and then you're better off. The state has already started to smooth out its payments. Again, it's the same issue, right? It's born of politicians from both parties refusing to fund the pension when they could have. When the mill rate was at 30, you could have gone to 32 and put that 2 mills right into the pension. But nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to make those tough political choices until they have to, and now we have to.
Ed Kaplan joined. Thanks for listening, Ed. In Hampton, another big issue has been policing. We had a lot of issues that New Haven started dealing with before Hamden as the town becomes less white. So now you got a majority of blacks, Latinos in the schools, and in policing, a lot of tensions between the community and the police, which are largely a white force. Although it was a black officer who came and did that shooting in Hamden, and there was a lot of protests about that last year, shot somebody who was unarmed in a car at a stop. And then you had a white officer who threatened to shoot and send a Latino driver to ICE because he didn't understand what he was saying to him, didn't believe that that was true at a stop. Are these fundamental problems in the department? How should they be addressed?
I don't know if they're fundamentals in this department. I think it's a fundamental problem of training, and I think it starts with the top. And I'd like, and I know that we just appointed a chief, but I believe he's really kind of a placeholder. I'd like to see the next chief.
And they put an assistant chief who appears to be the one they want to have next.
Yeah, if it's John, I think he's terrific. I went to high school with John. I think he actually understands these issues, and was also the head of the police union, so he's got a lot of credibility in that regard. I think you need a civilian oversight board. I mean, I think you need
civilian review, we call it.
Yeah, I think you do. I just think there needs to be.
You know what the challenge we found here? We've reconstituted is getting people to show up at meetings. These are long meetings.
Really?
We never had a quorum before, so for years it went out. We just have a reconstituted one where people want to get on.
That's really
because
tragic.
it sounds interesting and important when we talk about the need for citizen oversight, without a question, civilian oversight. But then you got to spend hours and hours on long nights really getting the details.
That's really. I would like to think.
Mayor Harp said, my number one goal, whatever form you want, is that people show up.
I'd like to think in Hamden we've got people who would show up for that. I'd like to think that at least. Knock on wood.
And what about in terms of the political split in the Democratic Party in Hamden? That's now being in the spotlight again with the upcoming Democratic Town Committee primaries between this sort of what's the word for the after not invisible, but the movement after Trump got elected to bring more progressives.
Hampan?
Hampan.
I guess I don't.
And the older Democrats.
I don't want to accuse you guys of being CNN, but I always feel like the Independent and some of the media sort of played that up a little.
But don't you think it's true that for the first time you had major challenges, but for a lot of these positions,
which is great.
Josh Elliott took out an incumbent. You had Lauren Garrett running against.
People have short memories. I've been around a while. There was this kind of sea change 25 years ago when groups from Spring Glen just took out the old guard. At that time, it was opposition to the mall. I mean, this sort of thing happens. I mean, it really, exactly. You remember it. So it does.
So giving historical perspective that it's natural within a party that's ruling,
and it's good.
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with that. There should be turnover on the TTC. Absolutely.
But you don't see any fundamental different visions of
government. I think people want what's best for Hamden and just have some slightly different views on how to achieve that. But I think everybody wants what's right for the town.
And did we leave out anything here that you want to talk about on the show?
I did want to just say real quick, going back to education, I had weighed in on this, and I want to be sort of clear about it. I respect what Daryl Goldson was doing on the New Haven Board of Ed. If I, having been a Board of Ed chair, I would have done the same thing he did, which was demand more funding, whether it's from the state or from your neighboring
in the end, he got a compromise that also
he did.
allowed us to let people in neighborhoods take empty seats at Magnus.
And that was good politics on his part. I disagreed with Hamden having to pay that charge, but I respect the position of a New Haven Board of Ed chair doing what is right for his Board of Ed. I did want to say that. Right. And thank God you're not the Bridgeport Board of Ed.
Mike D'Agostino, what a pleasure to catch up. It's been too long.
Yeah,
we can't let it go this long anymore.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
And Mike D'Agostino will be on the hustings for Bernie Sanders' candidacy for president.
Feel the burn, baby.
He's feeling the burn.
Go to Connecticut for Bernie 2020.
All right.
Sign up and volunteer. Come out walking.
Well, Mike, thanks so much for coming in and making time for Dateline Hamden. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Thanks for the comments and the people checking in. Thanks to Yale New Haven Hospital for providing support. And thanks to today's miracle man behind the controls, none other than Brian Slattery. You'll see him playing his fiddle and other instruments at local gigs, writing and editing art stories in New Haven, and working the controls when Harry Droz isn't here.
Good Hamden guy,
WNH, good Hamden guy. And we're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing another Hamden and New Haven collaboration, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.